Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to get you informed by, well, cracking open the sources. Today we're jumping into a topic that's, well, it's complicated and growing fast. It's where traditional fishing meets modern technology.
That's right. And our main source for this dive is a really key review paper from 2014. It's by Lorenzen, published in the Journal of Fish Biology. The title is Understanding and Managing Enhancements: Why Fisheries Scientists Should Care.
Okay, that title definitely signals something. Like maybe the scientists haven't been caring enough. So before we get into the why they should care, those 10 reasons, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly are fisheries enhancements? FE, right?
Yep, FE. Basically, they're management strategies that use aquaculture technology, things like, raising fish in hatcheries and releasing them, or creating artificial reefs, maybe fertilization, stuff like that. And the goal is to deliberately boost or sometimes restore fish populations in natural ecosystems: lakes, rivers, oceans.
So it's sort of stuck in the middle, isn't it? It's active intervention, which is different from traditional fisheries conservation that often tries to limit human impact. But it's also not fully controlled, like, say, fish farming in tanks or pens.
Exactly. And that's really the core issue Lorenzen is tackling. Fishery science kind of split historically.
Mhm.
You had fisheries ecology, focus on wild stocks, often viewing intervention as, well, problematic. And then you had aquaculture science, all about control and contained systems. Enhancements, because they're this hybrid intervention in natural systems, they kind of fell through the cracks. Scientifically neglected, even though, as we'll see, managers out there are using them all the time. Lorenzen says, look, this is a huge blind spot.
Right. Let's get into that. Reason one, they're happening anyway. Just the sheer scale of it. What are we talking about here?
The scale is, frankly, pretty staggering. Just in the United States, state agencies release over 1.7 billion hatchery fish every single year. And this isn't just a few trout here and there. It covers more than 100 different species. It's industrial scale.
Wow. 1.7 billion. That number alone. It forces you to rethink what wild fisheries even mean in the U.S. context, doesn't it?
It really does. And globally, same story, maybe even bigger in some places. Think about China. Enhancements are used in over 80% of their reservoirs. That adds up to more than 2.5 million tons of fish annually. Or consider Alaska salmon. A good chunk of that harvest, maybe around a third, which most people think of as purely wild, it actually originates from hatcheries. It's just everywhere.
Okay, so if it's that widespread, it must be incredibly complex to manage, which leads straight into reason two. Lorenzen says these enhancements create exceptionally complex systems.
Oh, they absolutely do. Once you add hatcheries, stocking, habitats,
Yep.
it's not just about the fish and their environment anymore. The system now includes the biology, yes, but also the habitat, the whole aquaculture side of things, genetics, operations, then the markets for the fish, the rules, the governance, and crucially, all the different people involved. The fishers, the managers, communities, angling groups. It's a web.
Yeah, I'm picturing trying to balance this huge equation with dozens of variables, but you, as the manager, maybe only directly control a few of them. How do you even approach that?
Well, part of the answer is it links to reason three, which is about where these enhancements tend to pop up. They seem to thrive where you have a combination of two things. Firstly, a high potential for technical control, basically, the ability to use that aquaculture tech effectively. And secondly, a high scope for governance control.
Governance control. You mean things like strong property rights over the fishery or really clear state management authority?
Precisely. And here's the interesting feedback loop Lorenzen points out. The investment in enhancement technology, putting those fish in the water, often helps justify or legitimize stronger governance and property rights. We stocked it, so we should manage who catches it. And then having that stronger control makes stakeholders more willing to invest more in the enhancement technology. It feeds itself, needing both the tech and the management structure.
Okay, so there's this dynamic. Let's talk about the upside then. Reason four. Successful enhancements can really broaden the toolkit for managers, right? Offer outcomes beyond just conserve the wild stock.
Exactly. Because you have that technical labor, you can aim for very specific goals. The paper actually lays out 5 main types of enhancement systems. It's really useful to understand the differences.
Yeah, let's quickly break those down because sometimes the distinctions, especially around restoration, can seem a bit fuzzy.
Okay, so first you've got 2 types really focused on just maximizing fish production. That's culture-based fisheries and ranching.
Mm,
In these, they often don't even rely on the fish reproducing naturally. It's mostly about stocking heavily and then harvesting efficiently.
right, production focused. Then there are types more aimed at fixing a problem, like rebuilding a stock.
Correct. You have restocking. This is usually temporary. You release fish to help a population bounce back quickly, maybe after it was hit hard by overfishing or a pollution spill. The idea is to stop once the wild stock recovers. Then there's reintroduction. Also temporary, but the goal here is purely conservation to bring back a population that had completely disappeared from an area, locally extinct.
Okay, some temporary fixes. What about the ongoing ones that mix with wild fish? That sounds like the trickiest category.
That's stock enhancement. And yes, it's often the most complex and controversial. This involves continuously releasing fish into a population that is still reproducing naturally. This is where you run into major risks of genetic impacts on the wild fish, competition, all sorts of trade-offs. A related one, slightly different goal, is supplementation. Here, the main aim of releasing fish is to boost numbers in a small or declining population, specifically to preserve its genetic diversity.
What really jumps out from the paper, though, is that the wins aren't always just about more fish to catch. You mentioned some wider benefits.
Absolutely. The Alaska salmon example, it wasn't just about volume. The enhancements led to more consistent harvests, higher quality fish. That stabilizes the regional economy, which is huge. And maybe even more compelling are the social benefits. In Laos, community-run enhancements in small water bodies generated cash income. And the community used that money directly for things like building schools or roads. The fishery enhancement became a tool for local development that's way beyond just fish biology.
Which makes the scientific neglect seem even more bizarre. Okay, let's pivot to the downside now. Reason 5.
Yeah.
The paradox of failure. If these can be so good, why do so many apparently fail or even cause ecological harm, but they just keep going?
Yeah, this persistence, despite failure, is the real puzzle Lorenzen highlights. The harm is well documented. Hatchery fish often suffer from what's called domestication selection. They're raised in protected environments, so they lose traits needed for survival in the wild. They perform poorly, die off quickly, or just don't reproduce well. And if they do survive and breed with wild fish, they can introduce maladaptive genes, reducing the overall fitness and resilience of the wild population.
And you also mentioned the risk of them masking the real problem, like stocking fish into a river that's declining because its habitat is degraded.
Exactly. It creates a false sense of security. Lorenzen uses the term techno-arrogance, this belief that we could just engineer our way out of fundamental ecological issues like habitat loss or overfishing by pouring in hatchery fish. But the core question is, why do these programs, even ones shown to be biologically ineffective or harmful, often persist?
Logically, you'd think if they don't produce more fish or achieve their goals, funding would dry up. They'd stop.
That's the rational view. But the reality is messier. Stakeholder incentives aren't always purely about biological success or catch rates. Sometimes just the appearance of doing something proactive, stocking fish, provides political benefits for agencies or satisfies user groups like anglers, regardless of whether it actually works long term. Plus, stakeholders often operate with inaccurate mental models. A common one is assuming stocked fish just add to the total population. They don't always consider that those stocked fish might compete with and potentially replace wild fish, especially if resources like food or space are limited. Density dependence.
So, if these flawed perceptions and persistent failures are so common, then reason 6 seems critical. Effective science engagement is the pathway forward. But it's not just about fish biologists talking louder, is it?
No, it absolutely requires a more holistic approach. Science engagement needs to go beyond just counting fish. It has to understand stakeholder motivations, look at the governance structures, figure out what social changes might be needed alongside the technical ones. A really powerful example of this, done well, is the hatchery reform process that happened in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., focusing on their salmon hatcheries.
Right, I remember hearing about that. It was a major science-driven overhaul of dozens of programs, wasn't it? What was the outcome?
It really demonstrated that you can find constructive solutions and trade-offs. They used adaptive management, integrated scientific models looking at genetics, ecology, harvest. They managed to shift many programs away from just maximizing hatchery output towards a model that better supported the wild renewable resource.
Yeah.
And the result, they actually improved the conservation status for a lot of wild salmon populations, over 70% for some Chinook and coho stocks, while in many cases also maintaining or even increasing sustainable harvest opportunities. It showed science could lead to win-wins or at least better compromises.
And the encouraging part, based on reason 7, is that the scientific tools needed to guide these efforts, the models, the frameworks, they largely exist already.
Yes, that's a key point. We generally have good scientific guidance available. Sophisticated population models, bioeconomic analyses, frameworks for assessing risks and benefits, decision rules. These can help predict outcomes before huge investments are made. The failure isn't usually a lack of science. It's more often a failure to effectively integrate and apply that existing knowledge across both the fisheries management and the aquaculture sectors. We often know better, we just don't consistently do better.
Okay, let's look at the final 3 reasons. These seem to shift focus towards how studying enhancements can actually benefit the science itself. Reason A is about advancing and unifying fisheries science.
Right. This is about how tackling enhancement challenges actually pushes the boundaries of the science. Because they are so complex and interdisciplinary, you have to bring different fields together. To really understand the consequences of releasing hatchery fish, you need population ecologists talking to geneticists, talking to economists, talking to sociologists. Investigating domestication selection forces you to blend evolutionary biology with practical, real-world ecological experiments. It breaks down those traditional scientific silos.
And this leads to what I think is one of the most intriguing points. Reason 9, that enhancements offer unique opportunities for large-scale experiments. How does that work? How can management programs double as labs?
Well, they provide a way to conduct deliberate, large-scale experimental manipulations of fish populations and even entire fisheries in the wild. This is something traditional ecological studies can rarely do ethically or practically. Think about trying to understand fundamental ecological processes like density dependence, how population density affects growth or survival, or how mortality rates change under crowding. Enhancements allow you sometimes to push the system beyond its typical natural limits by adding a known number of fish of a specific age or size.
So you can artificially create conditions to test specific hypotheses.
Exactly. You can decouple interacting factors. For instance, understanding how fishing effort responds to fish abundance is tricky because usually high effort quickly reduces abundance, changing the very thing you're studying. With enhancement, you could potentially maintain an artificially high fish abundance through stocking and then observe how angler or fisher behavior changes in response, in isolation. It's a powerful tool. The big caveat always is you have to carefully consider those potential domestication effects. Hatchery fish might not behave or respond exactly like wild fish, so that needs to be factored into experimental design and interpretation.
Understood. Okay, finally, reason 10 looking ahead. Lorenzen argues that the pressures and incentives for enhancements are basically guaranteed to increase significantly in the future.
Yeah, all the major drivers point in that direction. Continued human population growth means more demand for fish. Increasing pressure on natural habitats degrades wild stocks. And then there's climate change. Warming waters, changing flows. This is already stressing fish populations. Enhancements might even play a role in climate adaptation strategies, like potentially helping to establish freshwater species in new, cooler river systems if their native habitats become unsuitable, assisted migration, essentially.
And you mentioned earlier how stronger governance, like rights-based fishing systems, also encourages enhancement.
Right. As management becomes more defined, perhaps granting clearer access rights or even property rights to fishing groups or communities, those groups have a stronger incentive to invest in their resource. And enhancement is one very direct way to do that.
So the trend seems unavoidable.
It seems likely, yes. Which brings us back to the main message. Scientists, managers, everyone involved needs to fully recognize enhancement systems for what they are. These unique, hybrid entities, neither fully wild nor fully farmed. We need to apply the holistic frameworks we have, integrate the knowledge across disciplines, and perhaps, as some researchers like Hutchings suggest, even intentionally design and run some enhancement programs primarily as research facilities to really capitalize on these unique learning opportunities they present.
A proactive, integrated science for a complex hybrid reality. It really does feel like the necessary path forward. So, considering all this, what's maybe the most challenging question this raises for someone working in fisheries today?
Well, I think it forces us to confront this. If stakeholder perceptions, social goals, and political benefits can sometimes be more powerful drivers for continuing an enhancement program than its actual biological outcomes. How should we allocate scientific effort? How much focus needs to be on understanding and managing their beliefs, the governance systems, the social dynamics, compared to focusing solely on the fish biology? It's a fundamental question about the scope of fisheries science itself.
That definitely reframes the challenge. A lot for you to think about in your own deep dive. Thanks for joining us today as we explored the complex world of fisheries enhancements.